Persuading people to take the actions we want can be hard. Our teams and clients are bombarded with thousands of messages every single day. But there is a way for you to get above the noise. Stories. This is the Stories with Traction podcast, and I'm your host, Matt Zaun. Join my guests and me as we unpack the power of storytelling. We'll talk about topics like leadership, sales, and marketing, all through the lens of strategic storytelling. Enjoy this episode. Part 2 with Rachel Simon. We're going to talk about how you can create a company culture of storytelling on LinkedIn during this episode. Now, before you listen to this episode, I would encourage you to pause and go listen to part 1, which is share your stories on LinkedIn. So pause this episode. I will have in the show notes. You could just click and go right to that episode, and then we can tackle the part 2. So Rachel, thank you so much for being back, for your time. Welcome back. I'm excited to dive in.
Absolutely. Can't be lots to talk about.
Yeah, and I feel like last episode we covered a lot, and I feel like it was extremely valuable. So I just want to do a brief recap before we kind of take what we talked about and dive and expand even further. So we had talked about 3 main points that I think is very, very important for business leaders to grab a hold of. And that is, you had mentioned authenticity leads to engagement. So really positioning the leader to be more authentic. And that was really good from a branding perspective as well. That authenticity is going to lead to engagement. And then you put out the challenge on sharing one story a week. Just share one story a week. It could be 10 to 15 minutes where someone schedules it in their calendar as a task. That's what you had mentioned, which I think is invaluable advice. And just start sharing one a week. And that's going to lead to even better communication skills as a leader, because they're going to understand what story is working, what story is not working. It's a great test lab. Then the advice you gave regarding identifying content buckets was incredible. You talked about, just as examples, a couple of them could be company culture, problems you solve, stuff that you like as a leader, having those buckets. So let's dive a little bit further. So once someone really takes ownership of the messages they're sharing and they're creating that habit, that routine of consistently sharing stories on LinkedIn, how do they encourage and inspire their teams to do this? Where would they start regarding team engagement?
Yeah. And I love that description of it as a habit, because that's exactly what it is. It's building a practice. And we all know practice makes perfect, or better. So building that habit and really setting that example. When it comes to disseminating that down to the teams, the people that are, out and about doing the work, bringing in new business, talking about the company, the starting point is getting consistent brand messaging out to everybody. So this is something I see far too often, is assumptions are made. Hey, everyone has a LinkedIn profile. They must know what they're doing. Newsflash, that is not true. LinkedIn is so complicated. I mean, in comparison to some of the other social platforms, like you can throw an Instagram profile up in a matter of minutes. A LinkedIn profile has so many pieces, so many components. It changes all the time. Like I believe last year, somebody, I believe it was Kevin Turner, who's a great expert on LinkedIn also, identified over 60 new features that rolled out in 2021. Now, the average user is not going to keep up with that. So understanding that we need to help and coach our team on the how and the why that we want them to use it, and literally serve that brand message to everybody on a silver platter. Give them a consistent visuals. So that would be branding that they can choose to use in their banner image, and a boilerplate description of what the company does to use in their experience. Also, a tagline to include in a headline, in their headline, if they choose to include the company name. The reason why I say that is that lots of company names don't necessarily indicate what they do, right? There's some just like fun, wild, wacky company names out there. If nobody knows what your company does, just listing their name in your headline is meaningless. So serve that up, I like to say, really literally on a silver platter, make it as easy as possible for your team to be able to pop those components into their profile. So at least you know you have the same messaging and the same branding going out across everybody's.
Absolutely. And this screams alignment, right? So getting everyone more in alignment with the consistent brand messaging. I really appreciate you mentioning the complexities of LinkedIn. So there may be people listening to this thinking, wow, complexities, why should I even do this? What's the importance? So Rachel, you and I were talking before we hopped on here together, just on the sheer numbers of what organic reach can bring. So we were talking low numbers and more higher realistic but more stretched numbers. So just to give people an idea, if you're a medium-sized company with 250 employees, and if you get, I use the example of 30% alignment, okay? So not the majority of alignment, just 30% alignment, that would be 75 individuals that are consistently posting stories on their LinkedIn accounts. Depending on how many views they get, you are going to be getting, if done right, millions of views. So we had talked about low and we had talked about high. So what was the low number that you had given? I think it was a few million.
It was like 37 million views as a potential.
And that was like on the lower end.
That was the low side. Yeah, that was the low side. And like just thinking about what the cost of that would be if that was paid media versus this is free organic reach. It is, LinkedIn remains the best platform for organic reach out there. Maybe TikTok is creeping up there, but like, I don't know about you. I'm not dancing on TikTok anytime soon.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And you know, there are many conversations we could have about TikTok. One of the things that I would recommend to everyone listening to this is there's been a lot of poor strategy regarding TikTok. A lot of clients, even like prospects that the listeners of the Stories with Traction podcast have, they're not on TikTok. And I see a lot of companies wasting their time. So we could absolutely dive into that. Maybe one day that'll be a massive platform. It is now, but like a massive platform that business leaders could really take advantage of to land clients. But what you and I are seeing, Rachel, is a lot of engagement on LinkedIn. A lot of individuals, prospects are there. And that's why it's so important to really get this alignment because of what can lead to from a sheer number perspective. So I recommend people invest in this. I recommend they invest time, they invest resources, because on the low end, you had 37 million. On the higher end, I had 150 million views. So I would ask everyone listening to this, what would you pay? Let's just round up to 40. What would you pay for 40 to 150 million views? People, traffic driving to these profiles, traffic driving to the messaging of your company. If you really sat down and you looked at it from an advertising dollar perspective, more than likely you'd be putting a substantial amount of financial resources into it. And the way LinkedIn works, it's more that organic. So I think that really speaks to the why, Rachel. So I appreciate you mentioning alignment. So once they have individuals more aligned, where they understand the value, they understand the why, what kind of communication from leadership should they be getting regarding the structure of stories, regarding how they can actually have this consistent brand messaging? Where would they start to put those pieces together?
You know, I think it's going to be from the similar starting point of what the leaders themselves have gone through. So again, not to dig on, corporate marketing. It's a tough job. There's a lot of stuff that goes into it and a lot of expectations. But very often, a company marketing strategy, when it relates to LinkedIn, solely focuses on the company page. And the messaging that goes out is make sure you share and like the stuff on the company page, or, hey, here are 5 posts. You can share these. So there's no personalization. They're very cookie cutter. And, some people will personalize, but others just want to get that box checked and are going to copy and paste. So how weird does it look if you have like 5 people from the same company essentially writing the exact same post? It's not great. So I think that the key is giving the team the tools they need to succeed, but also giving them the freedom they need to be successful.
Yeah, so let's talk about this freedom. So giving team members the liberty to start being creative, and I think the creativity aspect leads to a vibrant company culture. And I think this is really important for leaders to recognize, is that you can have fun with this. You can have a lot of fun with this. I recently did, well, not recently, but a while back, my days are running together. A while back, I did a podcast episode regarding the gamification of business and the importance of literally utilizing games to drive out messages and really get team buy-in. And it really led to this vibrant company culture of creativity, because a lot of business leaders are talking about winning the talent war, retaining top talent. We don't want our people to be taken away from us and all these different things. Well, it starts with creating that vibrant company culture. So one of the things that I've seen, Rachel, and I'd love to process this with you and expand out this point, is I've seen when companies assign an ambassador that focuses on prompts, I've seen it shifts the focus from, we're going to give you the freedom to do and post what you want, but let's have fun with it. Let's be creative. So like, as an example, a prompt could be, what is the craziest morning you've ever had coming to work? Or what is the biggest lesson you've had in the last few months? Or whatever the case may be, and then allowing the team members to post stories regarding that. Have you seen that work with different companies, like start competitions or games or strategy, gamification? Have you seen anything regarding that with companies that you've worked with?
That's, I haven't actually seen that myself, but I love that idea, because it can be really hard to have the blank page and be like, what am I going to talk about today? Which is partly why, again, like we talked about in part 1, the content buckets piece is really helpful. And that's something that, to your earlier question, that should be shared down the ranks of let's come up with what you want to talk about, right? What are your content buckets? But from there, it still can be kind of hard to find like inspiration of what to post. And so giving content prompts is an awesome idea. And they can be range from, telling those personal stories, but also some that are going to speak to what the company does. What's the biggest client win you've seen? What are the problems that you solve? I mean, just helping to pull that content out, but not just make it boring and be like, I do, but getting it into sort of more of a narrative and a storytelling piece. So I think content prompts are fantastic, because we all could use a little bit of help, like to get that engine, roaring so that we can take it off.
I really appreciate you mentioning the client wins. So, what's the biggest client win? That's one of the many importances outside of the metrics, outside of the numbers. So we had talked about, the amount of views companies could get if they actually do this. So aside from that, you truly are going to be creating a company culture of storytelling on LinkedIn. The power of that is your team members are going to be more cognizant of stories that are happening around them. So think about this, Rachel. If they actually take what you're saying and they actually apply it, now they're going to be really looking for those client wins. So how amazing would it be to kind of change different content prompts regarding, one of your favorite clients that you've worked with in the last week, to a huge win, to a struggle victory story, to, focusing on different emotions of those clients. Maybe they started out being really concerned about something. Now they're ecstatic about it. So I think that would create a culture, I know that it would create a culture of team members being more cognizant of that. So they're on the lookout for those stories. And that's what's going to really fuel back to one of the first things that you had said regarding habits, the routine. It's going to build this routine And then you could start focusing on more of a systematic approach. But I really think it starts with that motivation at the start of it to really drive out these stories.
Absolutely. And you know that those stories are being told every day in the workplace. They're being shared internally within teams. They're being shared up the ladder to leadership to show success or challenges. So it's just a matter of like wrapping your arms around them and utilizing them, activating them in different ways on LinkedIn. And obviously you have to be careful. You can't necessarily name your clients, but you can tell stories without sharing details that identify who you're talking about. And they're just as impactful and powerful. I have one client, I help her in a one-to-one coaching capacity, and she's a management consultant, and I'm always giving her the guidance. I was like, this is great content. You're sharing great content. You have so much value. You need to add in some stories of how your clients have actually done these things, because that's what's going to break through more than the fact that you are an expert in this, and this.
Yeah, that's an extremely valid point. I appreciate you mentioned about more of the privacy aspect, because I feel like a lot of people get very concerned about that, about not giving names up. And I want to speak to that really quick, because that's a really important point that is on a lot of individuals' minds. And that is one of the things I get often. I get this question almost all the time, is should the story be true? And my immediate response to that is yes, because the way we communicate and connect as human beings is who are you, what are you about, and where did you learn it, right? So the who are you runs deeper than I'm Rachel or I'm Matt. The who are you kind of goes deeper, almost to the core. Are you a person of character? Are you a person of integrity, right? So if as leaders, if we are just spewing out lies, that really tears into the fabric of who we are. So I always recommend people share truthful stories. But with that said, we want to be mindful of protecting people's identity in certain situations. So as an example, there are a lot of nonprofits out there that are concerned about this because of the potential threat to the person they're sharing the story of. There's a lot of nonprofits that take care of people. So think of, if it's a domestic violence situation, of course, they would not want to reveal that person's identity. So they need to be very cautious and careful of how they're putting different characters in the story. And I deal with a lot of attorneys as well. And of course, they can't name drop different individuals that they have as clients, but there's a way that you can do it to protect the identity of the person you're sharing, but still keep the story intact to be as truthful and honest as possible. So I don't know if you want to speak to that more, but I appreciate you mentioning that, just because I know it's on a lot of people's minds on, should I share names? Should I not share names? If you have permission of the person to share the name, 100%. And if it's not going to cause any kind of harm to them to share the name, absolutely. But do you want to speak to that a little bit more about how people could be framing their story so it's still truthful? They're sharing something that actually happened, a win in business, but they're protecting the identity of their clients.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you can think about the story and what are the components, what are the beginning, middle, and end that are the most important, and then how can you frame that in a way that makes it a little unclear as far as who you're specifically talking about. So, and you can even lay it out there at the beginning of like, that this is, you've changed some details just to protect your client or protect the customer. I mean, people do that all the time, even, thinking about like names have been changed, like true crime things or things of that nature. So it's getting down to what is the actual inherent point of this story that I'm trying to get across. And like we talked about in part one, we're telling stories to make a point about a business related topic. So the story isn't the point, the story is the frame to tie it into what the actual larger point of it is. Again, if you can get your client or customer's permission to tell their success story, great. But some of the stories you're going to share are going to not be success stories. They're going to be challenges. And in that case, you can't say who you're talking about. So you need to be able to kind of make it a little bit obscure, but still get your point across.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That's a really good point. So for anyone asking for an example of this, I have one right here. So let's go through it.
Perfect.
So we were talking about this earlier, Rachel, about this one post. I want to dive into it because it does speak to not sharing the person's name. And also there's a very specific reason why I did this. I learned to do this through incredible LinkedIn coaches and strategists like Rachel as far as the framing of stories. So I want to dissect this with you, Rachel, just to give people an example of what it means to actually share a story on LinkedIn. So recently I posted a story on LinkedIn regarding taking my son to school, dropping him off, and getting to a meeting. So I'll read it to you and then we can kind of dissect it together. It's good to have a plan until your kid throws up all over you. 3 years ago, I was on the way to an important meeting. The goal was simple: drop my 5-year-old off at school and get to the meeting as quickly as possible. If I didn't hit traffic, I would make it just in time. My son said, "I'm not feeling well, Dad." Ah, he projectile vomited all over my suit and my car from his car seat behind me. I was pissed. I started freaking out. I need to be at this meeting. What should I do? I did the only thing I could do in the moment. I laughed. I called the meeting planner and explained what happened in the most humorous way possible. She loved it. I didn't understand at the time what this conversation would do to our business relationship. This call built trust, built rapport, and was real. She ended up becoming a huge client. So, moral of the story: get drenched in vomit. No, I'm kidding. The point is just be real with people. You're not Superman or Superwoman. And if you were, it's not relatable to anyone anyway. Be yourself, be real, be human. That story was posted on LinkedIn now for the fourth time. Okay. So I post that story probably about every 9 months, give or take. I think the last time I posted it was maybe 7 months ago. So every several months I'm sharing that. That was the fourth time that I posted it. I'm going to post it again. So for people, so I'll just speak to the post a little bit. And then Rachel, I'm interested to hear your perspective on this so we can kind of build from it. Why would I post that? Okay, so I post something like that for numerous reasons. One, I'm telling people I'm not just some person on LinkedIn trying to get people's money. I'm a father. I am a family man. That's really important for me personally because it really creates more of that trust factor that I'm not just someone trying to sell something on LinkedIn. And then in addition, I'm speaking to the client that I want to have. I want to have more clients that are willing to work with me, especially in circumstances like that, because obviously I couldn't control that situation. That story, and again, it's been posted now for the fourth time, has gotten me a lot of phone calls. I've actually booked meetings because of sharing that story. I literally had a call today with someone because they saw it, connected with me, said, "Hey, I want to bring you in for a workshop. Let's hop on the phone. I love what you're sharing on LinkedIn." So it just goes, again, speaks to the magnitude of what we're talking about, Rachel. So could you share a couple points regarding that? Just because it was a very real example that I could point to, and a timely example. Can we kind of expand that a little bit about the importance of sharing stories similar to that on LinkedIn?
Yeah. Well, first of all, that post made me laugh out loud. And the fact that you've shared it multiple times, now we've been connected for more than 7 months, and that's the first time I've seen it. So it's a good point also about repurposing your content because you don't know who's going to see it. And no one is probably going to remember that you posted it whenever you posted it. Why it's a great story because like you said, it is very relatable. I don't know a parent out there that has not gotten something disgusting put upon them by their children. That definitely has happened to me in the past. And reminder that like balancing being a parent or having responsibilities with family members and working. I mean, we're all doing our best, right? And so sometimes we're like doing our best to keep it all together. Yep, like you said, you're going to get there if there's no traffic, if circumstances work out perfectly, you're on time for this super important meeting. But guess what? Circumstances did not work out perfectly. And the lesson learned by just being upfront with your potential client, they saw you as like a normal human. I mean, and the truth is that if that person had been like, well, forget it. If you can't make it, then, we don't want to work with you. That's not the kind of client you'd want to work with anyway. Right. So that bigger, broader lesson of pulling back the curtain, showing that full side of who you are as a human person is what's going to get you in front of the kind of client that you want to be working with. That's why I love stories like that.
No, I appreciate you mentioning that. Absolutely. So you're exactly what you said. You're positioning yourself to get in front of clients that you want to be working with. It builds that story that leads to more trust, more rapport, more relatability, especially if you're dealing with a lot of clients that have children. I'm always mindful of that. The overwhelming majority of clients that I work with have children. So I'd be foolish not to share stories of my kids with business themes intertwined. But I want to talk about numbers. So I'm doing this in real time. I didn't have this ready to go before hopping on here. I'm literally looking at my phone right now, reading this. So Rachel, I mentioned you, I shared this 4 times. You also mentioned a few points that I want people to recognize, especially as leaders trying to encourage their team members to do this. So you had mentioned it was the first time you had heard the story. And it goes to speak to, we have been connected, but you might not have been on LinkedIn at the time that I posted it the last time. It could have been a certain time of the day where you were on a call yourself, so you didn't see it, whatever the case may be. That's why it's really good to continue to share it and recycle through. So I shared it 4 times. I'm looking at the numbers right now. It got 30,000 views within the times that I shared it. It took me 20 minutes to write that post. So in my opinion, if I'm going to spend 20 minutes to write a post, I want to get residual benefits again and again and again and again. That's why I'm planning on posting it probably in 9 months to a year again. So for everyone listening to this, you're going to see the post if you follow me on LinkedIn, if you're following my content, so one way or another. Between posting that, I got 6 phone calls. Okay, I'm looking now at all the people that commented, some of the people that engaged, 6 phone calls. So I want people to think about that for a moment. 20 minutes of work, posted it 4 times, 30,000 views, 6 phone calls. This is what people are missing out on if they're not encouraging their sales reps, their marketing team, their HR department this is what they're missing out on by not sharing stories.
And they're inbound. It's not that you didn't get 6 responses because you were constantly pushing out something to people. You got 6 people coming to you. How much more efficient is that? I mean, that's the goal.
So it's the difference between ripping one's hair out trying to do crazy cold call sales pipeline processes versus what you just said, the inbound. It's the most beautiful thing ever. Those calls, I receive messages, hey, can we hop on a quick 15 to 30 minute call? I want to learn more about what you do, see if you're a good fit for a company. We're interested in bringing you in for your services. Get on the call. I've landed business from posting that. So within 20 minutes, that is the power of that. And then again, to speak back to your point, Rachel, about these content buckets, and then we had talked about the content prompts. Now team members are going to be more cognizant of that, and they can start utilizing stories within their day-to-day. This is the beauty of it. Once you get stories that truly have engagement on LinkedIn, more than likely those are stories that your sales rep should be sharing during a sales pipeline process. As far as, they're on the phone, they're trying to close a deal, there are different stories that they could be sharing. They're going to learn that through LinkedIn. Maybe there's different marketing channels. They need to be sharing it not just on LinkedIn, but in an email blast. They could learn what's working on LinkedIn to start doing that.
100%. I mean, my dad was in sales his whole career. I don't know a salesperson that I would not call a schmoozer, to use a good Yiddish word. because, you got to schmooze up the people. You have to get them to like you. And the way you get people to like you is get them to know a little bit about what you're all about. So we can use these kinds of stories, these kinds of content to kind of schmooze up our audience on LinkedIn. It's just a different format.
Sure. All right. So let's speak to the fear factor. Okay. So far, people are listening. They're understanding the why. They may understand, okay, I could do a few things to build this company culture storytelling on LinkedIn. It could lead to more engagement, more exposure, more sales. But what happens if I have team members that post stories and then recruiters are contacting them and now they're going to be taken out of my organization? Let's speak to that fear factor, because there are a lot of business leaders out there in the United States that's a huge concern of theirs, where they want to restrict what their team members are saying because they don't want their team members to be visible on LinkedIn. So let's talk about that for a minute. What would you say to someone like that?
Hate to break it to you, recruiters are contacting them anyway. I always go back to this. I had an uncle that worked his whole career for GE from start to finish. Started in his 20s, retired in his 65, got his gold watch and pension. We don't live in that world anymore. People don't really work for the same company for their entire career. And sometimes I have one friend who's been with her large, kind of global company for almost 20 years and is considering to make a shift. And she's afraid that she's pigeonholed herself into that kind of company because a startup would look at her and think that she wouldn't be the right fit. So we live in a different world these days. And, the idea of like holding on to your team, you're so afraid they're going to leave. They are going to leave. Some people are going to leave, and then you're going to find some great new people. So giving them that freedom and just stop worrying about recruiters finding them, because recruiters are finding them whether you want them to, whether they're posting or not. That's just the world that we live in, I think.
Yeah, I appreciate you mentioning that. Absolutely. They're being approached, but also think about this too. So we're talking about all these numbers. Business leaders can take advantage of this, like in a good way.
Totally.
So think about it this way, Rachel, if one of their content buckets was, what kind of questions are their hiring managers getting during an interview? If one of the content buckets was speaking to that, they would actually be bringing in more people based on the stories they're sharing on LinkedIn. So as an example, more than likely, when you have managers that are doing interviews, you're getting the same questions as business leaders. You're getting all kinds of different questions. What are those questions? So my challenge to everyone listening is write them down. And then what stories speak to those questions, exemplify the values intertwined in those questions that your team could be sharing. So as an example, one of the questions a lot of people are asking in an interview is there room for me to grow within this organization? So if you have numerous team members that might have started out as interns and now they're VPs, or maybe they started somewhere in this company where they were like HR and now they're in sales for whatever reason. So there's different rooms for growth and expansion and more responsibilities, and for them to take an active role. Those could be stories that are shared based on the prompts. So then instead of them being concerned about that fear factor about people leaving, people will be coming in because now you're attracting the talent you want by sharing the values you have.
I mean, 1,000,000%. Yes. And, the other, to kind of add on to that, candidates are going to look up their potential managers, their potential team members on LinkedIn. They want to like what they see. And so to your point, being able to show that vibrant company culture is going to attract the people that you want to come and join you to build that, to continue to build that company culture. I would imagine today too, a question that comes up a lot, because I know it's more important kind of in the coming up generation of people entering the workforce is on like corporate and social responsibility. Push that out through your content. What is your company doing in the community? What are the causes that are important to you? How do you engage your team in something beyond, the four walls of your building, whatever those various things are? So it is both a customer acquisition tool, but it's also potentially a talent acquisition tool as well.
All right. So thank you for mentioning the CSR piece. I appreciate it. So I do have to give a shout out to Dan Koval. I did an entire series on the podcast regarding corporate social responsibility. We tackled the what, the why, and the how. I'll have all those links in the show notes of this episode. Go check it out. It speaks exactly to the point that Rachel's making regarding there are stories to be shared if you do have a CSR arm of your company. Don't you want your employees to be sharing that? If there's nonprofits that you pour into as an organization, that could be one of those content buckets, Rachel, right? The content buckets that you talked about is if they're spending their day helping a nonprofit, or if they're pouring their resources in and you have matching contributions, there's all these different stories that could be shared that, guess what, it's going to lead to that vibrant company culture through sharing stories on LinkedIn. Because there are a lot of companies that are hurting to revive their culture, and a lot of their employees fled to LinkedIn to find their own cultures, to find their own tribes on LinkedIn because they were feeling burned out and disconnected within their companies. Well, get ahead of it. My challenge to everyone listening is get ahead of that. Create a company culture of storytelling on LinkedIn by doing what Rachel said, having these content buckets, having these content prompts where they're going to feel more connected to your organization by doing that. So thank you for mentioning CSR, because I've been really excited about the engagement and questions I've been getting regarding this series. So I'll put that in the links. It will speak to what you're saying for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's such an important topic these days, and even kind of going more granular, because, each employee is people. We all have causes we're passionate about. If a employee of, company X is doing some big thing, like they're doing a team and training marathon and they're raising money for the Leukemia Lymphoma Society, or they had some big accomplishment, that they gave in their community, they won an award in their community, shout that out. I mean, you don't have to only shout out your team for company related wins, shout them out for personal wins too. It builds really goodwill, but it also, again, highlights that culture that you're celebrating the wins of your people, regardless of where those wins come from.
What you're saying, I don't want it to be lost. I don't want it to be lost because there's so much power in what you're saying. I recently read an article and it spoke to the lack of the words thank you in the workplace from managers. Like, it was a staggering, the numbers were like horrifying, to be honest with you, that the lack of legitimate appreciation is so few and far between that if a manager would just say thank you, that they appreciate different elements of work that their team's doing, they would get more buy-in. Could you imagine, Rachel, if they actually applied what you're talking about, actually edifying their people on social media, edifying their people on LinkedIn? I mean, you want to get people fired up about your mission, about your company, do what Rachel's saying, and you will have people that will go out of their way to share the message of your company. And that all ties back to your point, Rachel, about consistent brand messaging. They're going to want to consistently tie in and be a team player with that.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's pretty sad that there's not a lot of a good culture of gratitude among in companies. I mean, a little thank you goes such a long way in making people feel appreciated. It should definitely not be discounted.
It was sad, but I think that leaders that grab a hold of that are really going to separate themselves, that it doesn't take much to just add a little bit of appreciation. So my goodness, talk about taking what you said, Rachel, and actually edifying them on LinkedIn, where all their prospects and their potential candidates for job growth and advancement would be. That could have major, major ripple effects. So I really appreciate you mentioning that.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so many opportunities to do that, right? I mean, people are always bettering themselves. They get a certification, they get their degree or whatever it is. Just give them some, a nice pat on the back. Like, way to go. Proud to have you on the team.
Sure, absolutely. Absolutely. That will go a very, very long way. So, Rachel, thank you so much for your time. I know you're extremely busy, and I appreciate you doing this two-part series with me. I know it's going to help a lot of people. So, my challenge to people is really go through part one and part two. In part one, we really talked about you as the leader and really starting that habit and the importance of just starting to share stories on LinkedIn. And then with this part, Rachel, I feel like we covered a lot. And we covered a lot of good stuff, a lot of valuable things. So I want to just recap briefly my three takeaways from our conversation. So you started out talking about consistent brand messaging. It really tied into what you said in the last episode about alignment. The whole goal is to get alignment regarding the stories, the messaging. Then you talked about the content buckets again, about the importance of having a systematic approach. A very simplistic way to do that is establishing content buckets. This could also lead to content prompts, setting someone up as the ambassador of the content prompts on LinkedIn, where they're saying different prompts to really create, whether it's a game, whether it's a competition, whatever it is, to drive out more of the stories. Then we talked about this is all going to lead to creating a company culture of storytelling on LinkedIn and the importance of it. That once an organization starts doing this, they're going to see stories that are really connecting with their target audience, and they can use the stories in multiple different ways. Sales pipeline processes, another marketing channel, whether it's email or whether it's even paid advertising, it's going to be an awesome testing ground for them. So Rachel, thank you again. We covered a lot. And if anyone listening to this wants to know more about you, what you do, they want to bring you in for training, where's the best way that they can connect with you?
Well, you can find me on LinkedIn because that's where I am all the time. I like to say, when I coach my clients, like, you can get a lot done in 30 to 45 minutes on LinkedIn. Me, I'm on there multiple hours a day, but that's my job. So that's where you can find me. And yeah, I'm really passionate about getting teams, getting companies to see the sheer opportunity that LinkedIn has for them. And I think the numbers that we talked about at the beginning should be like mind blowing if they break it down in comparison to thinking about the paid media cost of that amount of impressions that are organic. And like you said, we took a teeny tiny subset of that. So imagine if you really activated, and I like to call it, activate your team to be your best brand evangelists. That's what they are. And when they're just sitting there being quiet, it is an absolute missed opportunity.
100%. So, and I'll speak to that. So I challenge everyone to, if nothing else, follow Rachel on LinkedIn. I will have her LinkedIn account, the link in the show notes. Follow the content she's putting out, because there are tons of LinkedIn coaches, but I really appreciate what you do, Rachel, where you really do talk about alignment and you talk about how to get companies on board with not just speaking to the individual, but really speaking to the leader to create that company culture of storytelling on LinkedIn. So I very much appreciate that. So everyone, follow Rachel. If you have any questions, feel free to connect with her and message her on those. But thank you again. I very much appreciate your time today. And I know that my audience got a ton of value out of it. So thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me back. It's been great.
Thank you for listening to the Stories with Traction podcast. Please leave a review, since positive reviews will make it easier for others to find this conversation. Next episode will launch on Friday at 8 a.m. Eastern. Until then, remember, if you want to persuade with power and inspire those around you to action, you must share more stories.